4 astronauts, 25,000 miles per hour, and a heat shield everyone already knew was broken. The next few minutes will either prove that NASA made the right call or reveal that they sent humans home on a gamble. And we won't know which one it is until after they're already safe. Stick with me until the very end of this video, because the most important part of this story doesn't happen during reentry. It happens after. And when I tell you what engineers are looking for the moment that capsule is pulled out of the water, you're going to understand why this mission kept scientists up at night for 3 years straight. But first, quick question before we dive in. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I'm always curious who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Most people think the hardest part of going to the moon is getting there. The launch, the rocket, the 240,000 miles of empty space between Earth and the lunar surface. Those things are hard, genuinely hard, but they are not the most dangerous moment of the Artemis 2 mission. The most dangerous moment is the ride home. Here's why. When astronauts return from the International Space Station, which humanity has been doing routinely for decades, the spacecraft hits Earth's atmosphere at around 17,500 miles per hour. That's already insanely fast, but we've done it so many times it barely makes the news. Coming back from the moon is a completely different category of problem. The Orion capsule returns at roughly 25,000 miles per hour. That's Mach 32, 40% faster than an ISS return. And speed doesn't scale linearly when it comes to heat. It roughly doubles the thermal energy the spacecraft has to survive. What does that actually mean? It means the air in front of the capsule compresses so violently, so instantly, that it stops being air. It becomes plasma, a superheated sheath of ionized gas wrapping around the capsule like a glove, pushing surface temperatures past 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly half the temperature of the surface of the sun. And for several minutes during that phase, nobody can talk to the crew. Not mission control, not family, nobody. Plasma blocks every radio signal. The capsule goes completely dark. 4 people, alone, inside a fireball. Now here's the part that makes this specific mission unlike anything since Apollo. The heat shield protecting those 4 people, the only thing standing between the crew cabin and 5,000-degree plasma, already failed once. Let's talk about what a heat shield actually does, because it's not what most people think. It doesn't reflect heat. It doesn't just insulate, it sacrifices itself. Orion's heat shield is coated in a material called AV-coat, an ablative compound, meaning it's engineered to burn away in a controlled, deliberate manner. As it chars and erodes, it carries thermal energy away from the spacecraft instead of letting it soak through into the cabin. It's essentially a slow, managed destruction that keeps everything behind it alive. The shield itself is massive, 16.5 feet in diameter, the largest ablative heat shield ever built for a crewed spacecraft. During the Apollo era, technicians filled over 300,000 individual honeycomb cells by hand with AV-coat. Took months. For Artemis, engineers modernized the process, switching to 186 pre-machined blocks bonded directly onto the capsule's titanium skeleton. Faster, more efficient, supposed to work just as well. In December 2022, Artemis 1, an uncrewed test flight, returned from lunar orbit and splashed down in the Pacific. Mission success on paper. Then the engineers got a closer look at the heat shield. Damage at over 100 locations. Not just surface char. Large chunks of AV-coat had physically broken off, a process called spallation. Material that was supposed to erode gradually had instead cracked, built up pressure underneath, and violently ejected. 2 years of investigation, over 120 individual tests. The answer they eventually found was this: the AV-coat blocks weren't porous enough. During re-entry, gases formed deep inside the material but couldn't escape. Pressure accumulated beneath the surface until pieces simply popped off like a blister. The block boundaries, the seams between each of those 186 sections, showed the worst damage. The weakest points in the design had become the failure points under real conditions. Now here's where this story gets genuinely uncomfortable. By the time engineers fully understood what had happened and why, the Artemis II capsule was already built. The heat shield was already installed and bonded. Replacing it would have meant years of additional delays and enormous cost overruns. NASA faced a direct choice: wait and rebuild, or fly with the existing shield and change the mission to reduce the risk. They chose to fly. And to make that work, they changed how Orion comes home. During Artemis I, the capsule used what's called a skip reentry, dipping into the upper atmosphere, using aerodynamic lift to briefly bounce back out, then plunging in again for final descent. It's elegant. It gives mission planners flexibility in where the capsule can land and extends the available range dramatically. But that skip phase, that brief moment where heating drops before the final plunge, is exactly what caused the damage. The partial cooling let gases accumulate inside the AV coat without enough char forming to vent them properly. Pressure built, chunks broke. For Artemis II, NASA replaced the full skip with a lofted entry, a shorter, steeper, more direct profile that avoids the dangerous cooling interval entirely. No bouncing, one continuous controlled descent. It came with real trade-offs. The landing zone became more constrained. Available launch windows narrowed by roughly 50%. Mission planners lost flexibility they had counted on. But the steeper profile keeps the heating pattern in a zone where engineers have substantially higher confidence the AV coat will behave the way the models predict. This specific re-entry profile at full lunar return velocity has never been flown with humans aboard. Not once. Artemis II is the first. Let's walk through the final 13 minutes, because that's what flight director Jeff Radigan called it, 13 minutes of things that have to go right. Hours before re-entry, the crew performs final trajectory correction burns, tiny thruster adjustments. The entry angle has to be precise. Too shallow, and the capsule skips off into space permanently. Too steep, and the deceleration forces become dangerous. At 400,000 feet, the European service module separates. It provided propulsion, power, and life support for the entire journey, and it cannot survive re-entry. It burns up. From this point, the crew is alone in the capsule. Then, the plasma forms. AV coat begins to ablate. Char builds up. Gases vent through the surface. The crew feels up to 3.9 Gs, nearly 4 times their own body weight, pressing them into their seats. And for several minutes, from the ground's perspective, there is nothing, just silence, waiting. Then, communications return. But the capsule is still moving at around 325 miles per hour, far too fast to land safely. At 25,000 feet, the forward bay cover ejects. 3 small parachutes clear it away. 2 drogue chutes deploy, each 23 feet across, slowing the capsule and stabilizing its spin. Then 3 pilot chutes pull out 3 massive main chutes. Each one is 116 feet in diameter. Each one weighs 310 pounds. Together, they slow Orion from 100 miles per hour down to 17. 11 parachutes in total. The system is designed to land safely even if one main chute fails completely. Splashdown. Pacific Ocean, off the coast of San Diego. Navy divers from the USS John P. Murtha are already in the water. The crew is home. And most people think the story ends there. It doesn't. Here's what I told you at the beginning. Here's the part that makes Artemis II different from every other mission in recent memory. After the crew is extracted, after the handshakes and press conferences and celebrations, the Orion capsule gets loaded onto a ship and sent back to Kennedy Space Center. Engineers remove the heat shield, and they inspect every single inch of it. Every crack, every char pattern, every location where material was lost, every seam between those 186 blocks. They compare it against their models. They compare it against the Artemis I damage, and they ask one question. Did the steeper entry profile fix the problem, or did it just hide it? If the shield shows controlled, predictable ablation, minimal spallation, clean char lines, it validates 3 years of work. It validates the decision to fly. It clears the path for Artemis 3, which already has a redesigned, more permeable version of Avicoat in production. The program moves forward. If the shield shows unexpected damage again, even if every astronaut is perfectly safe, it raises a question that is much harder to answer. Not just about the material, about whether the models themselves can be trusted, about whether NASA understands the problem as well as they believe they do. The crew can come home safely, and the heat shield can still tell a troubling story. That's the delayed verdict that makes this re-entry matter beyond just one mission. The astronauts land in the Pacific, but the real answer gets delivered weeks later, in a lab at Kennedy, when someone lifts a piece of charred Avicoat off a titanium skeleton and measures how deep the damage goes. Getting to the moon is the headline. Getting home is the engineering. And now you know exactly what that engineering cost.